Bardock, the father of Goku, is an absolute fan favorite. Despite beginning life as an anime-only character, he's proven to be one of the most popular Dragon Ball figures of all time. So much so that Akira Toriyama decided to make him canon to the original manga. But beyond the awesome design and amazing fights, let's explore what the special has to say and just what the meaning of Bardock's struggle is.
This will change everything.
Through its 48-minute runtime, the Bardock special tells the tragic tale of a rebel soldier, a father, and most importantly, the furthest thing from a traditional hero, trying his hardest to defy and change fate. However, as we all know, his own actions aren't enough. This is a story unlike anything else in Dragon Ball. While we begin every other Dragon Ball adventure in a wondrous world with our hero Goku, this is instead a dark tale that begins with death and tragedy, something which Toriyama himself said he could have never written. But before we get to that, first we need to frame when this special was made. The Dragon Ball manga was in the middle of the Frieza arc, and Super Saiyan was still but a twinkle in the reader's imagination. We were literally just about to get to final form Frieza, and in the anime, we were even further away from the conclusion, as the next episode preview was all about Recoome. It was on that day, 17th of October 1990, when this special premiered, stemming from the questions of what were Goku's roots and Goku must have had a father. Dragon Ball did have specials before, a couple of safety PSAs, but never something like this, a story that really developed the ideas of the world as shown by Toriyama. In an interview for the Daisenshu databook, Toriyama explained, "I really like the idea of Bardock, Goku's father. It's quite dramatic, and the kind of story I absolutely wouldn't draw if it were me. It was like watching a different kind of Dragon Ball in a good way, so I thought it was nice." And it was clear that Toriyama did like it, because he included Bardock in the original run for the manga. This special is full of irony and contrast from the very beginning, as we open with Goku crying out loud in a world we've never seen before. That in and of itself shows how much different this will be from the traditional Dragon Ball. In this scene, Goku is in the most vulnerable position he could ever be in. He's alone, crying, naked, and a baby. And all through the story, we're reminded about how weak he is, with the doctors talking about how low his potential is. Essentially, in this special, he's the single weakest character, about to be sent off to a planet inhabited by even weaker beings. Yet somehow, he will be the one to not only defeat Frieza, but save the whole universe. I honestly think having the benefit of hindsight with the original anime being over for so long works in favor of the special. The dramatic irony the viewer has of knowing how the story pans out makes this all the more tragic, yet hopeful. But this is where we switch to the real story of the special. We go from a baby, the most innocent thing in the world, and cut to a beast. That's how we are introduced to Bardock, not as a man like Goku, but as a destructive monster. The full moon behind him linking the Saiyans to their primal power. The way it's directed even has us looking up at the Ozaru from a low angle, the same way the Kanasans would have been watching their own planet being destroyed. This is also one of the prime differences in how we're introduced to Bardock in the anime special versus Minus and Broly. While he is still destroying things in Minus, he isn't in his Ozaru form. This is a pretty stark difference between the two interpretations. And though I'm not going to go into detail on Minus/Broly Bardock today, the way they show him as a humanoid first and foremost makes me think that they wanted him to be more relatable and humanize him more. We then finish the rampage off with another shot of the moon. It's interesting how, despite being told all these years about how ruthless the Saiyans were, we rarely ever get to see them actually take over a planet. This is one of the only times we see a real Saiyan rampage during the prime of their race, showcasing the most bloodthirsty aspects of their culture. The only other times we see Saiyans cause this much destruction is during the Arlia filler, where Vegeta and Nappa take over that world. Toei likely added this filler to highlight the evil of the Saiyans prior to them getting to Earth, and how they're not faced in any way by the eradication of an entire planet by their hands. Now we see that Vegeta and Nappa weren't a special case. This was par for the course for Saiyan society, from the lowest to the highest class. And what's important here is that Goku's father was no exception. In fact, Bardock being depicted like this tracks, as one of the original plans for the Bardock special was to have him be a villain for Goku to meet and defeat, according to the Daisenshu. Even looking back at times where Goku and Gohan turned into Ozaru, the level of destruction is incomparable to what we see at this moment, with the only death between either of them being Grandpa Gohan, which happens off-screen. Obviously, it's important to know that for Goku's case, Toriyama hadn't fully realized the Saiyans just yet. The next shot we see is the sunrise over all of the dead bodies, and there's a beauty to it. The Saiyans were triumphant in their battle. To them, surely this is a victorious, joyous occasion. This is similar to how Frieza treats the Saiyans at the end of the special, where he revels in the beauty at the destruction of planet Vegeta. We see the Bardock squad resting after the battle, as Tora claims that Bardock went a little overboard while celebrating the birth of his son, Kakarot. We don't see Bardock's face at first, replying by telling his comrade that he's being ridiculous. He doesn't care for his son in the slightest. It's only when he sits up where we finally see his face, and Raditz wasn't lying when he said Goku was the spitting image of his father. When we first see him, we don't know who the Ozaru is, but now it's clear from the armor and the scar that it was Bardock. The Bardock Special's designs were helmed by Katsuyoshi Nakatsuru and later redesigned by Akira Toriyama, who kept Bardock's general design, but changed the hair to closely resemble Goku, while throwing everything about the other squad members out. While in a design sense, I think I may like Nakatsuru's hair better, I do think they made the right choice in changing him to look more like Goku. Let me explain. The impact may be lesser now that we have things like Turles and Goku Black, but seeing a man who looks just like Goku murder an entire civilization is kind of shocking. It really puts a huge contrast between Goku and his father. His design, from the scar to the bandana and the green armor, make allusions to something more militaristic. His appearance is a lot more rough and rugged, a contradiction to what Goku looks like usually. Another difference between the two of them is how Bardock and the rest have no problem putting down those weaker than themselves, showing how their civilization puts power levels to such high standards, to the point of dividing themselves between low, middle, and high class. This is of course perpetuated by Frieza, who is even higher than the elites. Goku, on the other hand, shatters those perceptions during the fights against Vegeta and Frieza later in the story. Funny enough, Bardock himself breaks that perception too, but his culture values the birthright so much that he's not even really able to see beyond it. They're all trapped in this cycle perpetuated by Frieza and their caste-based society. And despite being the lowest caste members, Bardock and his allies see those with lower power levels as even worse, even if it's their own kid. But are they really that much better than the people they kill when they themselves are the lowest of the low in Saiyan society? To put it into perspective, it took 5 Saiyans to take over this planet, while it takes a single Frieza to destroy the entire Saiyan race. It's ironic to have them talk this way about the Kanasan, given what happens later on. The Saiyans continue their discussion as one last Kanasan rises. He strikes Bardock in the back of the neck, giving him foresight. And this is when the story instantly becomes a tragedy, cursed with the weight of knowing how the deaths of millions will go down, and not being able to do anything about it. This is a pretty dark story element for Dragon Ball, but what makes this even more appealing is that we as an audience are in on this with Bardock. We know what happens to the Saiyan race, we know what happens to Bardock. In a way, Bardock and the viewer have this connection, this dramatic irony that the rest of the Saiyans do not. But his Saiyan nature still shows through, as he kills the Kanasan before passing out. He isn't like Goku, he's basically a villain who's murdered thousands. Yet, through the story, he is made sympathetic, thanks to the tragic fate he holds. The curse of knowing his race is about to end. And that's what makes the story so special beyond just Dragon Ball. Because despite knowing the future, Bardock fails, which is something we rarely see from Dragon Ball. Giving a character the power of future sight just to have them be incapable of doing anything about it is ultimately just a cruel joke. The closest thing we get to something like this is the future timeline. Either way, the Kanasan makes it very clear what's going on here, yet Bardock still doesn't understand or refuses to believe it. It isn't until way later on in the movie when he finally realizes the Kanasan was telling the truth. After all, the Saiyans as a whole are an arrogant race. It does make me wonder, were the Kanasans themselves cursed with seeing the fate of their own race before the Saiyans arrived? Because if so, that's pretty sad. We move on to see Kid Vegeta, and how even as a child he was incredibly powerful, truly a prodigy. He's easily destroying Cybermen left and right. Having the context of the original series, where Raditz is said to be as strong as a Cyberman, really puts things into perspective here. The elite are that much higher than the lower class. The scene in the ship shows us that Frieza and his men maintain the threat of the Saiyans in the back of their head, while still treating them like worthless beings. Kanasa was taken over a whole month earlier than anticipated, yet Zarban and Dodoria call Bardock and his squad just a bunch of nameless Saiyans. The ruling class of the Frieza force doesn't care about their workers, despite how good of a job they do. Zarban and Dodoria see the Saiyans as replaceable little worker bees, but even they can see that when together, united, they could be an issue. This is exemplified when we see Bardock back at the hospital, where the doctor explains that he has been beaten up so often that his power level keeps rising more and more, despite the fact that he's a low-class Saiyan. As a whole, the Saiyan race is growing stronger. Zarban and Dodoria clamor Vegeta's power, even with a sense of admiration, but the second he walks in, he's ostracized as not belonging there. Even with Vegeta being the strongest of the Saiyans, even while fearing what they could do in mass, they still don't see them as important. Of course, this is highlighted later on for Vegeta's character, as they underestimate him so much on Namek that both Dodoria and Zarbon die by his hand. Back with Bardock, we see his squad departing to planet Meat. The obvious pun here being that the Bardock squad Saiyans, a race named after vegetables, die on a planet named Meat. Meanwhile, we get the juxtaposition of Bardock in the tank and Goku crying, one of the many times Goku and Bardock are parallels in the story. Both are now in vulnerable positions, not just Goku, and it is during this time where Bardock gets his first few visions of the future. And it's not just the death of planet Vegeta, but what will become of his son, with the cries fading into the draining liquid, and Bardock is raring to go and join his teammates, who have already been deployed. He takes no time to rest, just like another Saiyan we know. Through all their differences, the father and the son at least have that in common. He dismisses those visions as just a nightmare. We then hear Goku's cries again, and Bardock freezes, recognizing them as the same cries from his dream. And despite saying he doesn't care for his son, he stops. Would he do that if he actually didn't care at all? And perhaps for a split second, he thinks they could be true. He reads the name, Kakarot, but leaves again when he reaches the pitiful power level, once again showing us how the Saiyan society only values the strong warriors. Even with the power of foresight, Bardock refuses to believe or acknowledge any of his visions he has seen, just because of his son's measly power level. He doesn't think they hold any merit. He doesn't believe that the man in his visions really is his son. That caste system once again getting in the way. And that's when we cut to the Bardock squad dying. The scouter being stepped on, a symbol between Bardock reading Goku's power level of 2 versus the scouter being destroyed, because ultimately, that power level of 2 will not matter, just like their caste system. Low class, high class, they all live under Frieza's rule, and they're all going to die. That's when we see another way Bardock is different from Goku in how he reacts to his friends' deaths. Previously, during the Saiyan arc, we have seen Goku angry and explosive at the death of his friends, something I believe this scene is trying to parallel, as the camera pans around to see the dead bodies. But Goku is more emotional, while Bardock's face remains cold. He holds his comrade, hearing about Frieza, but when Tora dies, Bardock doesn't say a word. He simply wipes Tora's face and looks around to see his other friends. It is instead through the bandana that we see his emotions, as the piece of cloth is tainted by blood. Because he's a cold Saiyan warrior who has been trained to be apathetic to everyone and everything, especially those weaker than him, Bardock could come off as uncaring. Yet, just like when he visited Kakarot, he clearly does care, even if he doesn't say it. A pretty stark contrast between how Vegeta simply kills Nappa without a thought. Tora's final wish is for Bardock to unite with the other Saiyans and defeat Frieza. It's only when the enemies show up and the bandana is on when Bardock starts to show emotions, as he, in a very literal sense, carries the blood of his race with him. He shows this in the only way he knows how: battle. Bardock fights using tricks, hiding, and using distractions to defeat his opponents. These could be seen as dirty moves, but at this point, the Saiyans aren't fighting just because they enjoy it. Instead, these Saiyans are fighting because it's their livelihood, and they have a job to do, and they have to accomplish it by any means necessary. Like I said before, Bardock used to be really weak, so surely he developed this style of fighting in order to defend himself, and defeat opponents who were stronger than him. But it's ultimately futile. Despite beating the rest, Dodoria is so far above Bardock that a single blast defeats him, as the bodies of his friends fly over Bardock and bury him. The next scene opens with a fantastic shot of Bardock over the bodies of his friends. It's a horrific sight. Then we move on to see Goku being sent to planet Earth, while an injured Bardock makes his way to planet Vegeta in a Saiyan pod, passing by Frieza's mothership. Goku and Bardock are once again contrasted here, as Goku is heading towards a blue planet full of life, while the other is going to a red one that might as well already be dead. Bardock and Kakarot intercept paths, and as they do, Bardock feels the connection once more. Images of Kakarot flooding his mind. It's obvious what path awaits both of them, as Bardock's ship is angled downwards, which could be construed as Bardock's path towards death, his fall, while Goku's is angled upwards, towards a brighter future, so to speak. When Bardock hears the name Earth, that's when he finally realizes that the nightmares were in fact premonitions, and that they would all be realized in due time. He really had been looking at the death of planet Vegeta, and despite bleeding out, he has to do something. It's really painful to watch him walk through the halls and fall, passing out. He could give up and die right then and there, but as he lays bleeding, he starts to see visions more clearly. Strange visions of Kakarot on a distant planet, and, of course, planet Vegeta's demise. But it's Frieza's face that wakes him up, giving him the strength to continue forward. He needs to gather an army and warn his people, fulfilling Tora's final wish. At this point in the story, it seems Bardock is under the impression that he has the ability to still change the future. This is much more tragic now, as the viewer knows that this is already set in stone. The slow, lengthy shots of Bardock struggling to walk down the hallway, accompanied by the quick shots of Frieza's spaceship looming ever closer to planet Vegeta, serve as something of a ticking clock. Bardock already knows Frieza is on his way. He needs to act now, a constant reminder of the death that could arrive at any moment. The mess hall is a great scene, with Saiyans who really are just fools unaware of their future. They're all surprised to hear that they need to defeat Frieza, and no one believes Bardock. They all laugh at him. In reality, they're all complacent to the system they're working in. They all seriously believe Frieza would never do something like that. But we have seen how Frieza talks about the Saiyans in private. But perhaps saying they're complacent isn't the right word. Maybe instead I can say that they're victims to the system, yet really reject the only person who goes against it, because they believe that they're essential to Frieza, that as loyal workers, they're going to be protected. Perhaps they've been so indoctrinated that they believe there's no alternative. First it was King Cold, then it was Frieza, someone so powerful there's really no chance that they could make any changes. Better to behave and keep their heads down than to attack head-on and risk being killed. After all, it's not like killing whole planets is something Frieza's against. They really are just convenient tools for him. Bardock runs, calling them all jackasses. He damns them to hell because he doesn't need foresight to know that that's where they'll end up. But as he runs, he ends up on a green planet, Namek, the place we know as the battleground for the final confrontation between Frieza and the legendary Super Saiyan. He reaches out, recognizing his son all grown up, only to have Frieza reflected. His fate is more and more apparent. He can't escape. He can't leave the entire race behind. He has time to survive. Yet, as he looks up at the two suns, he recognizes Frieza's ship overhead. It could be symbolic how, when the Saiyans eradicated the Kanassans, the first shot of Bardock in the special, he's situated in front of the full moon. And now Frieza, who is about to eradicate the Saiyan race, is shot as looming before the sun, a much larger, powerful, and imposing celestial body. In a way, to Bardock, this really isn't about Planet Vegeta or Kakarot anymore. This is about changing the future, defying fate, proving that he can do it. Though he's angry at Frieza, what he's really upset at is the fact that he's being told that there's only one path forward, and that despite all odds, he's going to go against it. He will change the future. Bardock, even while having one foot in the grave already, continues forward, pushing through the soldiers. His sheer rage and desire for change drives him. Earlier, we saw Bardock having trouble against just a few soldiers. Even standing was difficult. But now, when faced against an army, and being even more hurt, they can't stop him. They're attempting to hold him back and drag him down. It really is a powerful image. The insolence, the Dragon Balls on the Saiyan actually makes Frieza angry. That's when Frieza himself appears. He doesn't say anything at all, not even really acknowledging Bardock. He just remains seated, composed and detached. He even lets Bardock speak. To Frieza, this means nothing. It's really tragic, as at this point we are rooting for Bardock. Bardock is still under the impression that this future sight he was given is more so a warning and nothing set in stone. It's something that he can perhaps change if he plays his cards right. We as viewers know that this isn't true. But especially with the heroic scene right beforehand accompanied with the music, it's clear Bardock truly believed that he could make a difference. Perhaps we expected a fight between the two. I know I did the first time I watched this. But that's not what we're given, because in the end, Bardock is insignificant. Bardock's single, powerful blast is nothing to Frieza. Bardock here represents every single Saiyan, from the weakest to the strongest, from the low class to the elite. The blood on the bandana proves that. But all of that really means nothing to the Emperor. From the weakest to the strongest, they're all dead. Bardock launches his attack, a small blue sphere, possibly a reference to the moon once more, but maybe I'm reading too much into it. Whilst Frieza's own supernova attack multiplies in size into a gigantic sphere, more reminiscent of the sun. Bardock's attack is simply swallowed up in an instant. It is then when Bardock finally realizes that he cannot change the future, and he knows exactly what's going to happen in the next few moments. Bardock is engulfed by the blast, alongside all the men he was fighting against moments prior, demonstrating how even those who side with Frieza mean nothing if they're weak. Those men whom he had just commanded to fight on his behalf are all replaceable and perish to the Overlord. However, in Bardock's final moments, we see him smile, his mind showing him one more time the future that lies in store for his son. He finds solace in death, because if his own death and planet Vegeta's destruction is set in stone, then at the very least, his son's is as well, and he will face Frieza. He doesn't know exactly how it will happen, but he does know that Frieza will face off against his son. That's why, despite opening the special with Bardock dismissing Kakarot for his power level, he puts all of his hopes on him in the end. Even Zarbon and Dodoria can't believe the sheer power, as Frieza cackles over the beautiful fireworks. I think this is also where Zarbon and Dodoria themselves realize that they're also replaceable, just like every Saiyan. Bardock's words resonate alongside Goku as the bandana flies off. We are then shown a young Vegeta being informed of this planet's unfortunate demise, but he's completely unbothered, and he doesn't react in the slightest, painting Vegeta in a very unsympathetic way, as even Bardock was shown to care upon seeing his dead teammates. Vegeta doesn't seem to have any semblance of emotional attachment to his own people. This is arguably because he's an elite warrior, a prince, closer to those like Zarbon and Dodoria, harking back to the idea of the elite and the hierarchy within the Frieza Force. He too is complicit in the system, as he believes he's above the rest and immune to suffering the same fate. To put it simply, he thinks he's protected, and thanks to his selfish nature, nothing else matters, reinforced by how he disposes of Nappa in the future. But of course, Vegeta is a complicated character, because in his final words, as he dies on planet Namek, he, just like Bardock before him, puts the hopes of the Saiyans on Goku's shoulders. We close the special with Goku getting found by Grandpa Gohan, and instead of crying, he laughs, a contrast to the Vegeta scene right before, as Vegeta was alone, surrounded by corpses in dark lighting, while Goku is surrounded by life and abundance in a bright setting. He's found a loving home and baptized as a human. In a way, his fate was indeed changed. Although Goku's path was in a way altered, Bardock's desperate attempts to change the future and defy his own destiny ultimately failed, just like all of the other Saiyans. Perhaps commentary on how they were complicit in this horrific system for so long and ended up being victims just like those they killed. This seems apparent when it's a descendant, one not really complacent in the awful actions of the others, one who is so different from the original Saiyans to the point of rejecting his own heritage at first, who's actually the one to bring about change. Bardock was really just the starting point, driven by selfish reasons. Though Goku's desire to fight and improve is selfish, Frieza's evil brings about true heroism from him. Vegeta's death is similar to Tora's, as he puts the fate of the universe in Goku's hands. Vegeta, the representation of the system they were all locked in, puts all that aside and places his hopes on a low-class warrior. Vegeta dies in the system, but returns freed from it. Goku is the one to bring about the change his father wanted, through a desire to help and avenge those Frieza hurt. Not just his family or close friends, but everyone. And a desire to fight, of course. That's why, though some people argue that Goku and Frieza aren't really a good matchup since they have no real connection prior to the fight, I think that just makes it even more powerful. A Saiyan with no connection to his race, removed from the hierarchy Frieza leads, with no real vendetta against the Emperor beyond just circumstances. Yet, he's the one to stop the monster. Bardock's true enemy in the story really isn't Frieza. He is an element of it, but the main antagonist really is destiny itself. Bardock continues to desperately fight against what's to come. He tries to recruit his people, he tries to kill Frieza, all in order to stop destiny. He even says so himself. His real goal isn't to kill Frieza, but to change their destiny. Bardock really is unlike any other anime father out there, because he isn't treated as a mythical figure in this first special. He's just a low-class Saiyan, an unrefined savage who cares little for his kid. He's the kind of man Vegeta and the elite hated, the people he was so above. And I don't really have anywhere else to put it, but another important aspect of the story is Bardock's theme itself, Solid State Scouter. It's not only very catchy, but the words being said in Japanese are actually the rising power levels, counting up all the way to Frieza's iconic 530,000. The focus on these numbers is important, as Bardock is forced to accept that the fate of his people is at the hands of this kid, a baby with just a power level of 2, proving once again Goku's phrase of, even a low-class warrior can defeat an elite if he trains hard enough. It's really no wonder why Bardock has become such an everlasting character in Dragon Ball, compared to other movie characters. He's being reinvented multiple times now, though many of the other editions focus less on the tragedy and instead just try to make him look cool. And I think it ultimately has a really nice message, because beyond power levels, beyond hierarchy, it was just a boy with a power level of 2 who worked really hard to get to where he ended up, who ended up not just avenging the Saiyans, but saving the whole universe. And if that's not inspiring, then I don't know what is. Anyways, my name is SmugStick. I have plenty of Dragon Ball videos on my channel, such as this one, where I show my vision of future Gohan's transformation into Super Saiyan, or this one, where I recap the entire story of Dragon Ball GT. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at SmugStickDB, and until we meet again. See ya!